The other thing that I think is very hard for most of us to understand because we're not financially that sophisticated, or we are math challenged, or is the way hedge funds buy up industries or buy up in the particular example you take is of newspapers, newspaper chains. And instead of, as is traditional, to try and actually invest in the company, to try and save it, even especially if it's in a terrible state, they will essentially cut costs massively and then sell off assets and essentially kill it off by maximizing the value left in it, as opposed to attempting somehow to reinvest and rebuild in a hostile economic environment. How do hedge funds and equity funds do this to regular companies? I mean, and how did they get to the point where they could control so many American companies, so many enterprises in the United States?
Yeah, so today there are more Americans who work for private equity-owned companies than do for the U.S. government and the U.S. Armed Forces combined. U.S. government and U.S. Armed Forces in total are about 4.5 million employees, if you think of the Army and the military as employees, whereas private equity controls companies that in total employ about 9 million people and rising. The total assets under management has ballooned for private equity from like $1 billion in the 1970s when this form came about of ownership to, depending on whom you ask, like trillions of dollars.
What's wrong with groups raising lots of money to invest in individual companies and doing so on rather rational economic grounds and attempting to maximize profits in the process?
Yep. So let's talk about how a normal corporation works, and then we'll see the difference with private equity. So a normal corporation, you, Andrew, you've developed a kind of mosquito repellent that's a new way to repel mosquitoes unknown to humankind before. It uses ultrasound or something, whatever, let's say. So you have this idea, you go to a bank or other financial institution, you borrow money. Oh, the mosquito repellent is a hit. And it starts to, you start making profits. And so what you do is you return some of the investors' money every year or what have you back to them, whether through dividends or through interest on a loan. And that's perfectly fine because they took a risk on your business. And so they're entitled to some reward for the risk they took. But then you have enough other money that you may, after taxes and depreciation and so forth, that you reinvest in the business, knowing that in order for your company to grow, you need to reinvest in the company because capital stock depreciates, your buildings wear down, your people, you need to hire more people, so on and so forth. That's how most companies work in the sort of imagination of the American people. And up until not too long ago, it really was how companies, the typical American corporation worked. But over the past generation or so, what the American corporation actually does is every year it returns most of what it makes in profits after taxes and so forth. It returns it all to shareholders. So what happens when they do that is they erode their capital stock, right? They're not reinvesting anything in the business. And so about half of American corporations, publicly traded corporations, if you judge them by their investment behavior, they would be called this kind of eroder company rather than.
But why would it be in their interest to erode companies that they own or are investing in? Why would they not attempt to?
So this phenomenon of corporate erosion is heavily driven by Wall Street. The reason it's in their interest is because they think about what to do with a corporation solely on the basis of cash flow. They manage for cash flow, which means they want to extract as much cash as possible out of the business. So they
short
call
term,
it,
is what we're talking about.
It's a short term.
They have to get money back to the shareholders that year.
Absolutely right. So the problem with that is, so a typical, let's say, private equity company invests in 10 businesses and it squeezes cash out of all of them. By the way, as part of the process of buying, they also load the company up with debt. They lever up in order to buy the company. And let's say out of the 10 that they manage in this way, 9 go out of business. And in fact, ownership by private equity we know dramatically increases the likelihood of bankruptcy. But if only one of them does super well, then it's all a wash, and they end up working out just fine for them. The problem is that the typical worker or typical community can't make a similar bet. So it's not like, you as an employee, you think, well, I'll take 10 jobs and one of them may work out, and so the other 9 that I lose will be a wash. And so their risk profile that works for private equity doesn't work for ordinary people, or for communities that, for example, rely on one big company that was the town firm. It's the main company that employed everyone.